All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Again, I said a couple times that last presentation was a bit thick, and so I just hope that you take away from it, at minimum, just the nature of the gift of the Word of God that He's given to us, and the precious gift that it is, that He's not only gave it to the original authors, that He's preserved it through history and through the language, and so that in English language we can read it and understand it and believe it and obey it and act on it and all that. And it's quite simple. One thing I want to mention too, I say this to a lot of people. All of us have different intellectual abilities. Some of the stuff that I'm doing here is a little thick, right? So we all have different intellectual gifts. I encounter a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me. The thing is about studying the Bible, no matter where you're at, I encourage you to love the Lord your God with all your mind. Whatever that is, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a scholar, you don't have to be a genius, just whoever you are, God has given you your ability. Pursue it as far as your gifts will take you. And then the other part is, there are a lot of learned people that are a lot smarter than any of us who don't have the heart of a child. It requires the heart of a child to believe what God has said. Not the mind of a child, a heart of a child. There's a difference. So we can love God with all our mind, but if we forget to have a child's heart towards our Father, we can know the Bible and not know the Lord in it. And so I kind of live in this world with my colleagues and stuff, but we have to remind each other, as Martin Luther famously said, grant the Holy Spirit the honor of being more learned than you are. And I think that's a good way to live. And one of my favorite all-time quotes from Luther, and certainly overall. Okay, so now that being said, let me tell you about the Shiloh excavations. I've mentioned a couple times that we've been excavating at Shiloh. We are planning to go in 2026. You can be a volunteer, willing heart, with doctor's approval, we always say. We'd love to have you if you feel that God wants you to go. If you can't, you can support us financially. If you can't support financially, you can pray for us. And with the political situation in Israel, each year is a little bit more of a faith walk than it's been in the past. But we continue to go, and God continues to open the door. Okay, so let's talk about Shiloh. Go now to Shiloh. Have we found the house of God? Is the title of my presentation. Let's talk about Shiloh and some of the evidence that we've uncovered at this important biblical site. You can see here in the central hill country is where Shiloh is located. At the bottom of the map here is the top of the Dead Sea. I always say, go to the top of the Dead Sea, turn left, there's Jerusalem. And so we're due north in what's in the modern day called the so-called West Bank. In the hill country, or the mountains, often the Old Testament describes this region as that, Judea and Samaria. Shiloh. The whole assembly of the Israelites were gathered at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there. The country was brought under their control. The writers mention Shiloh 32 times in total that we count throughout the book of Joshua, Judges, and so forth. So very important. So there's some geography for you. We know that Shiloh is Shiloh. There's no dispute about that. It's in a couple of places in the early church fathers, Eusebius and Jerome, and also on this famous map. This is called the Madaba map. It's a Greek mosaic found in the church in the town of Madaba, Jordan. It's from the 6th century AD, and it has all kinds of interesting geographical references on it. But one of them is Shiloh, or Shiloh, where the ark stayed. And so here we have its location. There's really no dispute about the site of Shiloh as Shiloh. There's other sites that are disputed. Is this city, is I here or is it there? And there's other ones in Shiloh. That's not the case. We also have a tablet that was discovered. This tablet is a series of correspondences between the kings in Canaan and the Pharaoh in Egypt. Canaan was a vassal state of Egypt in the ancient world before the Israelites came on the scene. And so this particular individual is complaining about these nefarious marauders called the Habiru, who have killed Zemrida of Lachish, and that Yapti-Hada was slain in the city gate of Silu. We think this may be a reference to Shiloh. It would be very ancient. It would be the 14th century. Dr. Stripling's working on an academic paper about this. People have not been able to figure out what's Silu. And so Scott made the suggestion, well, what if it's Shiloh? It fits right in the description of what's going on here in Canaan. So could be a reference to Shiloh. Very, very fascinating bit of information about that. And we have many episodes of Digging for Truth where we talk about Shiloh. So if you want to know more about it, just go on our YouTube channel, put Shiloh. There's over 60 videos on Shiloh, a whole variety of different ones. Videos of us at the site, video of us showing people how archaeology works, talking about the evidence, and so on. So when we talk about the tent of meeting mentioned there in Joshua, we're talking about the tabernacle, which is described in the book of Exodus. It's constructed by the Israelites there. God gives the instructions for it, who he wants to build it, and so forth. The cubits are given in the biblical text, and then it needs to be converted to meters and feet. Okay, so we're using old Egyptian cubit because they're coming out of an Egyptian context, so we think that's the right way to calculate the cubits. We've got to convert it to a modern thing so that we can understand, well, what does that mean? So pretty substantial in its size. Here's a life-size replica from Timna Park in Israel of maybe what the sanctuary may have looked like. So a lot of people have done these. You can find lots of these online of a replica of maybe what it was, or what it looked like, excuse me. So, okay, so we talked about geography. We could talk about time. We're talking about a 324-year window from around 1400 BC to about 1075, which is when we think Shiloh was destroyed by the Philistines. We have carbon dates and pottery that date from this time. We found our expedition and another one have found a destruction layer. We think it's pretty clear it's probably the Philistines. There was a battle near there. The biblical text doesn't say explicitly that the Philistines attacked Shiloh, but they attacked the Israelites and took the Ark of the Covenant, and you can infer from that that they may have destroyed Shiloh, and we find evidence that Shiloh was destroyed around that time. So it's very, very likely to be the case. We have some evidence. If you're familiar with the tabernacle, it was portable. It moved through the wilderness during the wanderings and came with the Israelites. They literally packed it up every time they moved. But we do find evidence in the biblical text for that it may have become a permanent structure once it was at Shiloh. No longer needed to be portable because it was now in its home. We find that in 1 Samuel 3 and a couple of Jewish texts that describe the tabernacle. The language shifts. It starts calling it the temple of the Lord, and then it also says that there was doors on the house of the Lord. This is referring to the tabernacle at Shiloh. So a little bit of a shift of the language is a clue maybe that it became a more permanent structure. And I mentioned a couple of writings outside the Bible by the rabbis in the Mishnah, that the tabernacle was made into a house of stone, and it was called the resting place, and that in the Mishnah in Siddur Olam chapter 8 it says that it had stone walls. Okay, so now this is outside the Bible, so it's not definitively correct, but it may be correct. It may be an accurate testimony to the biblical text. And here's an artist's rendition of maybe what it might have looked like. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about discoveries at Shiloh. One of them that we've discovered ties right into what we're talking about here as far as the more permanent structure. We call it the monumental building because it's large. That's what we called it to start with because we didn't know exactly what it was. Here is a drawing of our excavations so far. So let me give you a little 101 archaeology here of this drawing. So you see this big, thick thing running through the middle here. This is the city wall. It's called the Middle Bronze. This is Canaanite. So the city of Shiloh existed before the Israelites came into the land. We don't know exactly why the Canaanites abandoned the city, because there's no description of a battle in the central part of the country. Okay? So maybe they heard about the Israelites and took off. But they didn't have to take the city by force. So there were Canaanites living there before that, all the way back several centuries. So this is a giant city wall. It's very typical of Canaanite, the way they built their city walls. And then you see kind of colors, different colors here. We got some structure outside the city wall to the north. We'll talk about that soon. We have these smaller walls in here. These are storage rooms. That would be where tithes and offerings would be brought to and stored. You need storage, right? If people are bringing their tithes and offerings, we'll talk about that. There's a series of different walls that run through here. Some are from later periods in time, like during the church period or the Roman period. We're going to talk about this building here. You see the red and the purple. It's quite long. It's oriented east-west. Not all of it's been excavated. You can see there's a blank spot here. But we've dug up quite a bit of it. And we found some pretty extraordinary things. The one thing that we found is when we started tracing it out, it almost to the foot is the exact dimensions found in the biblical text for the tabernacle. So at first we were like, no, this can't be. This can't be the same dimensions. This has got to be. Maybe we're misreading the evidence. Maybe we haven't uncovered enough of it. This was the first, when we started uncovering the building, some of the remains were from the Roman period, which would be much later. So it was like, oh, okay, maybe it's just a coincidence. So keep digging, see if you can find out. Well, we have found a number of extraordinary things, but one of the things is the dimension almost matches perfectly with the tabernacle measurements. So that is obviously very intriguing. And so that's been part of our thesis. The second part of it is we found a significant separation between this 2/3 of the tabernacle of the monumental building and the inner part of it. And this matches the descriptions of what you would call the inner sanctum, the Holy of Holies. It's about 1/3 of the length of the tabernacle and the length of this particular building. So that's very intriguing, and quite a bit of it is very well intact. You can see from this picture here. Here is one of those walls. We've gotten down quite far in here, and this is almost exactly 1/3 of the size of the building. So it's pretty exciting to kind of see, okay, we got a building, the dimensions seem to fit. Now we've got this inner structure that seems to, is this the Holy of Holies? That's really the question we're looking at as we're uncovering the evidence. It's hard not to build a hypothesis and get excited. You've got to be willing, though, if the evidence goes in a different direction, to say, okay, it's not the tabernacle building. But so far, so good. Here's an example of preserved wall number 10, and you can see how deep this is. This is unusual to find walls that are this old, that are this well preserved. You find some of it, but you don't find a lot of it. And I should say that associated with these walls is pottery from the middle of the Judges period, right at the right time. So we're finding evidence that's consistent with the occupation of Shiloh as the Bible describes it over those 3 centuries of time. That's a great photo of it. So here's a picture of my colleague. I've mentioned him before, my friend Dr. Scott Stripling. Here he is in 2017, driving in the very first stake. We drive in, we lay out the site in a grid, and then we put stakes in the ground, and then we tie string to put squares, and then we start digging. It just so happened in the sovereign providence of God that he drove in the first stake at Shiloh pretty much right over that monumental building that we later discovered. So that was kind of like total, well, if you were a secularist, you would say dumb luck. But if you're thinking in terms of, you can't help but be like amazed at sometimes God's sense of humor if this identification of this building turns out to be correct. So we got a monumental building. We're continuing to dig it. The time fits right. It's oriented east-west, which is very typical of ancient temples. We think We think that idea probably comes from the Garden of Eden narrative. They were cast out of the garden to the east. So to be reconciled to your God, you would come from the east back into the presence of the God in the temple. That's the idea. And so this building is oriented, when you stand there in the morning, when the sun comes up, it's directly at the sun coming up in the east. So it's oriented the right way. This is not a random building, it seems to us. Right dimensions, right pottery, right time frame. Okay? Now, one of the things we want to look at is, what do we find in the building, in the remains inside? What kind of objects do we find? What kind of evidence do we find? A couple of really fascinating discoveries. The biblical account talks about pomegranates. Pomegranate is a fruit, and the garb of the priests was to be made of blue and purple and scarlet yarns, pomegranates. Now these would be obviously made out of cloth, right? Not ceramic or anything like that. Here we have a reference in verse 34, a golden bell and a pomegranate. But the pomegranate was very important, had a very important role in the priest's garb. So in a way, maybe it became sacred. And the reason why we think that's the case is because inside the structure of the monumental building, we discovered a ceramic pomegranate. This is an extraordinarily important discovery. We think the hole for it was maybe to hang it, maybe on like a trio life motif or something like that. We're not exactly sure about how it was used. Other pomegranates have been found, but this one found at Shiloh, right? You think of the correlation with the priests. Now remember, the priest garb is made out of the cloth, so this wouldn't have been hanging on the priest garb, but it's showing there's some kind of importance related to a pomegranate. And so here's the pictures, various pictures and drawings of it. We also discovered the previous excavations by the Danish in the 1920s. When we went back and looked at their reports, they had misidentified this object as something else, and we think it was the top of a pomegranate. We actually sent somebody to the Danish National Archives to dig this thing out, and by the grace of God, it was there, and we were able to photograph it and measure it and draw it and all that other kind of thing. So 2 pomegranates discovered at Shiloh made out of ceramics. Ours in the monumental building. So this is very significant. And then this past year, we also found this mini pomegranate. This is made out of what's called faience. It's sort of a precursor to glass. And so this is another object, very small. You can see this is centimeters. So this is very tiny compared to the ceramic one. This was found in our sifting. So we sift the material after we go through it initially, the dirt. This might have been missed in the past, and we have a very rigorous system to make sure we find these small objects. So this is another important discovery. It says this has a indication of worship and sacrificial practice. They call it in archaeology terminology, cultic objects. But that word usually in English is a negative connotation, but we don't mean it that way. It's a worship-related kind of thing, sacred, if you will. So really, really intriguing. Another one that we have discovered a number of is altar horns. You would expect this, right? The sacrificial system's been set up at Shiloh. This is where the animals are sacrificed. The priests follow the rules in the book of Leviticus and in Exodus to follow all the details that are involved in the practice of the animal sacrifice. Here is built in secondary use. You can see this horn of the altar. The rest of it's busted off, but somebody later built it into a later wall. They didn't know what it was or didn't care what it was. It's interesting. The altars were supposed to be made from uncut stones. So, the Israelites had to find natural stones that kind of fit the way the altar was supposed to look. And so here, this was a natural, this was not worked by metal, which is the instruction in the Law of Moses. And then we have a couple of other stone altars that have been found. Not complete, but nonetheless there. And then here's even another one. being used secondarily. So a number of altars that we have found points to, obviously, the sacrificial system fits very nicely in that context. So we've got a monumental building, we have pomegranates, sacred, we have altars. We had this year before last, we found the shell of a murex. Now, what's interesting about this is, you might recall in the book of Acts, there's a couple references to purple dye making. In the book of Acts, I can't remember the context, but it's there, and this goes back into the ancient world quite far. The murex shell is a sea snail, and it produces a red and purple dye. It's called the Tyrian purple. So the city of Tyre produced this, which we talked about before. The dye is used in royal robes and priestly garments. So this could be, now the Mediterranean Sea is pretty far from Shiloh, so this could be secondary evidence pointing to the use of the murex shell's purple dye for the making of clothes for the priests. We don't know for sure. We need to find more of these murex shells, but at least finding it might be pointing us in that direction. So that's quite intriguing. This is, again, secondary evidence, but it kind of fits into the matrix. Now, I mentioned along the city wall also that we have storage rooms, and we have quite a few of them that have been built right into the city wall. Now, again, here's the city wall. This is Canaanite. So when the Israelites showed up, this major city wall was already there. But the Israelites built all of these storage rooms into the wall. So they used the city wall. You have to remake it because it's already there. So one part of the building is already completed, and they built all of these storage rooms. Here's a nice overview of an actual view overhead of the Canaanite city wall, and then all the storage buildings that have been found so far. Here's another really nice photo. This really draws it out. This is actually more recent because you can see we've gotten down further in the excavation down towards bedrock. So it's great having drone footage for this stuff because you can really see things very well. And what we have found in here is quite a few of what you see here. This is called a collared rim jar from the storage rooms. This particular jar is from the Iron Age. This is from the Judges period, and this is distinctly Israelite. There have been thousands and thousands of these found not only in Israel, but also over in Jordan. Remember that some of the tribes of Israel lived in Jordan, right? Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh, right? These collared rim Iron Age storage jars have been found over there as well. And you can see, we know this, the distinct thickness of the rim, and then you can see the secondary sort of little, right around the edge right there. These are made usually for the storage of grain. It's typically what they're used for. Classic Israelite storage jars found. No surprise, they're very thick, so they can hold a lot of stuff in them. You can see they're quite thick there. Really, really important discoveries. Would fit, makes sense. You got to have a place to store the tithes and offerings that are brought to Shiloh, right? The people are coming. It's a pilgrimage. It's like what Jerusalem becomes later. You go to Shiloh to be reconciled to God in the same manner that later they went to Jerusalem. All right. Now, I want to share with you really another remarkable discovery. This is what we call, it's called, the technical term is a favisa, or a sacred deposit. Of course, you think about the sacrificial system, you have to have a place to dump the materials after the sacrifices are performed, the animal bones, and where you dumped it and how you dumped it, it was still considered sacred. So it wasn't garbage per se. It was something more than that. This was a sacred activity. The whole process was a sacred activity. So here's our monumental building, as I talked about. Okay, this is looking north. And over here, back in the 1980s, archaeologists digging at Shiloh found this favisa, or sacred deposit, bone deposit, if you want to say. So I'll tell you a little bit about this. We wanted, when we started digging here, we wanted to re-explore what they discovered and do more excavation work here because we knew this was going to be a treasure trove, and it's turned out to be exactly that. So here's a nice overhead view of that area. In later periods, when it was no longer being used for sacrificial reasons, when the temple got moved to Jerusalem, it looks like people were still living around here, and they built these little storage silos, not knowing that this was a sacred deposit, probably. You can see these round, right? They stored grain in these storage silos. Here's a nice view of the Favisa looking east. This is what it looks like when the sun comes up. That's the same view from that monumental building as well. All right, really, really nice shot. So Favisa, we tend to find, it's sort of the understanding of it is, it has a core where most of the stuff is dumped and then it's dissipated and then scattered. That's all the technical terminology by the archaeologist. So naturally, one of the things that most common sense you would look for, okay, it's a sacrificial system, this is a sacred dump. What kind of animal bones do you find? That would be a very natural question to ask. Well, there's some fragments of animal bones. We have found in this deposit tens of thousands of animal bones. And so not only have we discovered them in spades, the previous excavation found them. We have what's called a zoo archaeologist on our staff who comes every year who's an expert on animal bones. And so he supervises this whole process through the 4 or 5 weeks that we dig. And so, I mean, we have so many animal bones, it's kind of overwhelming. So here we are, here's our team sorting through them, cleaning them up, and then they are kept and identified exactly where they came from. And our zoo archaeologist, Haskell Greenfield, who's from Canada, he supervises it, and he knows these animals. He can just look at the bones and tell you, that's a sheep, that's a bull, that's a cow, this is this, that. He knows the stuff. He's an expert. He's great to have on our staff. So he knows everything about it. So naturally, what you would want to do is, if you're thinking in terms of the Israelites, what kind of animals were they sacrificing? Were they following the law of Moses in terms of the kind of animals that we find in there? Well, turns out this is part of the scientific work that we need to do. We've got, as a profile, sheeps and goats, cattle, and then other. And for the most part, this is all kosher. There's been a couple of wild pig bones found in there, but we think that might be contamination. You would think the Israelites would not be sacrificing pigs. They were not allowed to do that. There's deer, gazelle, birds, seashell, little fish. So some of this stuff may be contamination from later, but the majority of it follows the Mosaic law very closely. And so other sites where it was Canaanite, you find a much higher profile of pig bones because they weren't restricted from sacrificing pigs as the Israelites were. And you see a distinct difference in the percentages. So we can do the scientific studies of this, and we continue to do that as we uncover more of the animal bones. One of the things that took place in this Favisa isn't just the dumping of the animal bones, but people would bring sacred objects and they would break them in terms of a form of sacrifice and put them in the sacred deposit, almost as a sacrifice of giving something valuable over to God. There's some kind of representation taking place there. The biblical text doesn't require that, right? But this seems to be something that people did here, because what we find in the Favisa is not ordinary domestic pottery like cooking pots and stuff that you use for everyday use, but stuff that is clearly specialized and more important. So here's a picture of stuff found in the 1980s. These are all objects that are not ordinary everyday type of pottery. They're more special. They seem to have some special function. In particular, the ones that we have found, someone asked me earlier about painted pottery. typically much more expensive, sometimes imported, but a specialized type of pottery, the really good stuff. I don't know, in the old days we used to get, what'd you get as a wedding gift? China. Then you put it in your china cabinet and never use it, right? Maybe think of it that way, you know, your ordinary stuff, but on Thanksgiving, we're going to break out the china because it's a special occasion. So that, I think, kind of like the idea, right, is the idea here, lots of specialized pottery that's not normal domestic stuff, and it's all Israelite period. Judges, late Joshua, early through the Judges period. There's another one there. Here's another beautifully preserved pottery sherd. And then here we even have a chalice. This is early Judges period. Again, something really important that someone put in here as a sacrifice. This thing is valuable. I'm going to give it to God, is the kind of idea, is what we think is taking place here. Now, earlier, when I was having lunch, somebody asked me about coins. I can't remember who it was. And I was talking about the Tyrian shekel, silver coins. Have you ever found gold coins? And I was tempted to say this, but I'm going to say it now. No, we have never found gold coins, but we have found in the Favisa the rarest of discoveries, and that is we have found gold pendants. Archaeologists can dig for 30 or 40 years and never find anything like this. Gold in an archaeological excavation in Israel is so extremely rare. And yet in this Favisa, we have found multiple pieces of gold. We think most of these were pendants that people wore that were very, very valuable in the ancient world. So this fits with our thesis about people giving over something of value into the sacred deposit, giving it over to God as a sacrifice. Here's a pendant that we discovered. Here's another one, possibly maybe a string would go through it. You wear it around your neck. We need to do some more study of this to see if others like these have been found at other sites and what we think they are. Here's the sort of mosaic, I suppose, of different ones that are found. This one down here was found in the 1980s, and we were able to get a new photo of that. That was found in the 1980s excavation. Over here, probably an earring. Okay, pendants, this one here. The most intriguing discovery this past year is this piece of thin gold, and you can see there's a face that's been etched into this gold. You can see the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and then the chin. Extraordinary, extraordinary discovery. This is going to go on the front cover of our final publication from Biblical Shiloh when we're all said and done. I mean, this is so incredibly rare to find this kind of discoveries. So we obviously are just thrilled beyond measure that God has allowed these things to be preserved. And so we're going to continue to do our analysis of it. I would expect as we continue to go through the Favisa, we're going to find more of this. And so I don't think this will be supplanted for the front cover, but who knows? We might find something that's even more glorious. So we are the most privileged archaeologists in terms of finding this much gold. I mean, it's just extraordinary. So we praise God for it, and hopefully we'll find more. Again, this all fits very, very nicely with the relationship between the archaeology and the biblical account. Very self-evident. Okay. Also exciting, perhaps not as exciting as gold. Maybe I should have saved the gold for last, for effect, for dramatic effect. Let's talk about gates. I mentioned, earlier, did I mention about Eli? Did I say something about city gate? Remember the story of Shiloh, that Eli falls backwards the city gate, breaks his neck, right, when the Ark of the Covenant is taken by the Philistines and his sons die? Well, one of the theories at Shiloh is that the gate complex would have been coming from the south of the site. Just sort of was the idea, and people thought, and Dr. Stripling thought, yeah, the gate probably entered the main gate of the city is in the south, but it might make sense that there's multiple gates because the city was large. So we started digging on the outside of the city. Here again, here's your Canaanite wall that I've mentioned several times. You see this wall right here? Well, I supervised the excavation of that wall, and at the time we had no idea what it was until we started finding stuff later. And we started discovering that we think that this entire structure here is a large gate complex. I'm going to show you in a minute why we think that's the case. Here's the initial excavation. When we started, we found this sort of hole in the wall that seemed very symmetrical. Could be because people robbed the stones out in the ancient world, but it did get us curious. Could this be an indication of a gate? Well, it turned out to be pretty much that's exactly what it is. You can see this seems to be here as a gate complex, the entrance going up into the city of Shiloh. Here's another nice view of it. Now I know to the untrained eye that may look like just a big pile of stones, but for the archaeologist it's glorious because it's definitely a gate complex. We have found also pillars, these pillars right here in the city gate, which is another indication that we've identified it correctly. That wood right there is just, we put that there for stability purposes for this wall. That's not from the ancient world. Another reason why we're sure this is a gate complex is because we found these are called socket stones. So the gate door was made out of wood, and it would have had to stick in this giant stone so it could rotate. And we have found these at our previous dig, and we found a couple of them here at Shiloh. This is a classic gate post socket stone. And so this is found near there. This is another indication that we've identified the gate correctly. Here is another socket stone that we found also here where the gate post would go into. A lot of times these stones are extremely heavy because you want to have strength in the gate protecting the city. Here's a couple more nice overviews and pictures of what's going on. Down here is those pillars that I mentioned. This is the Canaanite city wall, and this is the inside of the city. All right. There's another nice view of the pillars really stand out, and they were found this way. So what will end up happening is to avoid those eroding and falling over, we'll have to conserve those. We have a process where we conserve it because now it's being exposed to the weather. And so we spend money. They get coated with a special coating, and we put cement inside of it so they're protected. And it's for tourism as well. So when people come, we want to eventually have signage put up that shows what all this stuff is when people visit the site of Shiloh. So on the whole, we have a number of things. I thought this nice artistic rendering would be helpful to you. Let's start down the south. This is where the gate is conjectured to be. It actually wasn't discovered. So this is conjectured. So this is the south where I'm putting this red here. Okay. A number of scholars thought the tabernacle would be on the peak, at the top, in the middle. Number 6 thought, well, that makes sense. Let's put the tabernacle at the top, high. Put it up high. But so far, didn't seem to be any evidence of that. Here we have our proposed monumental building, where we believe the tabernacle actually was, for the reasons I shared with you. Over here at number 4 is the favisa, the sacred deposit, where the gold was found. Number 1 is about where the northern gate is. Number 5, the storage jars. And then another scholar in the early 20th century thought the tabernacle would be placed up here, outside the city, at number 7. And there's a sort of a roof that's been installed there so people can go there and stand. A lot of people, tourists come there and read the Word of God and that sort of thing. So it's a nice devotional spot, but it's probably not accurate. And so that's kind of an overview of our excavations at Shiloh. As you can see, there's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot to be thankful for. Dr. Stripling says it this way: if you asked me before we started excavating at Shiloh, what are the things that I would find, what are the ideal discoveries that I could find in the next few years when you're digging? And so he said, well, I could find more evidence at the bone deposit for sacrificial activity connected to the Israelites, if I could figure out where the tabernacle was located, and if I could find the city gate. And here we are 8 years later, and we have some pretty strong evidence of all those idealized ideas that he had. So that doesn't often happen in the world of archaeology. You go into a project, you hope for the best. You might not find anything like what we have discovered here at Shiloh. And then before we get to questions and we wrap up, the last thing I want to say, I want to mention, I've mentioned before about volunteering. If you know anybody or you're interested, come and see me, email me. You could send me smoke signals, you could send me a fax, whatever you want to do. If you want to go to Shiloh, I'll get you there. But one more thing is I want to carry over to the New Testament just for a minute as we finish up. We think about these Old Testament accounts and their significance. Think about the tabernacle as the dwelling place of God. And this is where the sacrifices took place. This is where God's provision for reconciliation took place. But as we know that the blood of bulls and goats is ultimately inadequate. It only provides temporary reconciliation. And that's why each year and all of the rules of the Levitical system had to be carried out the way that God wanted them to be. And of course, we think about literally from the book of Hebrews, which is just a magnificent theological treatise. It's just, I mean, all of Scripture is the same in terms of its authority, but there's some aspects of Scripture that just draw out certain truths. And I find Hebrews to be one of those books that, if you want to understand your Old Testament, Hebrews gives you all that you need to know about all of what that means ultimately. You should read your Old Testament, but you should read it also in light of the New. So it says that when Christ came as a high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands. So we no longer need to go to Shiloh or Jerusalem. As Jesus said, you can worship the Father in spirit and truth wherever you are on planet Earth. Or even if you went to the moon, you could do that. But the point is that these accounts are shadows, types. They point us, they're true, they happen the way the Bible describes, but they point us to Jesus. They point us to him as the high priest. There's no more need for the blood of bulls and goats. Jesus has paid it all once and forever, and for our sanctification and justification and glorification. I thank him for that. And so I really, really appreciate being able to come here. I know I've talked a lot. It's been a fountain of information. You're probably going to be tired when you go home, but please know that I'm grateful, and I'm grateful for our conversations, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve you. Hope maybe to do it again, but in the meantime, let's have a final time for questions, and then we can wrap up for the day. Any questions? Have we flamed out? Is that a half hand I see there? Go for it, man.
Not related to Shiloh.
Okay.
But in general.
Yeah, sure.
What kind of challenges are you facing now, just due to the intense political climate there, like the war, the conflict that's going on?
Yeah.
What kind of challenges do you see?
Yeah, the challenge for us is largely one of discernment. So there's a couple practical matters. One is, if the authorities say you can't come and dig, that's the end of it, right? So you have that part of it. So if that happens, then we just don't go. But if they don't do that, at this point, our year-to-year philosophy has been, we're going unless God shows us otherwise. But that does bring up the question of security, right? The war broke out 2 years ago. Things are not the same. There's concern, some people have concern about going. Sometimes a spouse wants to go, a husband wants to go, the wife has reservations about it because, you know, what if something happens? It's all legitimate. We've walked it out by faith. The first year back, we hired a security company to give us consultation, to make sure that, you know, we're following all of our protocols. We're interacting with the authorities there. So it's a bit tricky, but the way that we approach it is we're going to go by faith, not naivete, right? But by faith, and that God will direct us. And if he doesn't want us there, then it'll be like Gideon's fleece. You know, just make it clear so we make the right decisions. It's a huge responsibility. You know, we're bringing all these people over, volunteers, God's people. They love us. They love the Lord. So that's kind of the way we go about it. We haven't found any resistance per se. No one is saying, don't come here, you know, like that kind of thing. It's just all about wisdom in the political climate that we're in and the potential dangers. I mean, you know, war could break out. And if I might share, I promise I'll make it short. Last year, this past dig season, I wasn't there, but on the last day is when Israel bombed Iran. And so the airport was shut down. And we had like over 35 people that were planning to leave the next day. So Scott decided we're not going to sit in the hotel room and cower in fear. We're going to plan. We're going to get on our bus. We're going to drive to Shiloh. And we're going to dig unless God shuts the door. And then obviously people had concerns about leaving, financial concerns, because they had, you know, a lot of people don't have a lot of money. They're paying. It's expensive to go over there. We had a donor that's on our board of directors step up and offer to pay for all the extra costs to change all the flights, for 2 busfuls of people to drive all the way to Egypt, stay at a hotel, tour for a day, and fly out of Cairo. So everybody in our group that was there when the war broke out got home safely they went to Egypt, ironically, right, of all places. So, did we act in faith? Certainly not naivete. And when we acted in faith, look what God did. I mean, it was unbelievable what God did. And so we got this money coming in, and we were able to reimburse every volunteer that incurred extra expenses by changing their flight. We paid for the hotel. We paid for the tours. They got that tour. They got to see the pyramids for free. So God took what was bad and turned it into something good. So now I'll add, we can't presume upon God that he's going to do that every time, right? We cannot presume upon him. But sometimes he just does stuff that just blows your mind, and there it is. So thank you for your question, though. Gave me a chance to give glory to the Lord and really commend my colleague, Scott Stripling, for leading by faith and not fear, because that's what happened. It's just unbelievable. I'm disappointed I wasn't there. But I do have a wife and daughter who would have been a little bit turned upside down by me